allowed to be disengaged. It's like conducting an orchestra, and it pays to know how to do meetings really, really well. One of the keys, and this is just an aside, if you don't know the church manual inside out, learn it, because there's plenty of people in your churches who will quote it back to you. And if you're in a meeting and you're chairing it, it just pays to know the church manual to be able to make sure things are going in the right direction. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to agree with it. But the bottom line is that's the operating manual that we function under. And again, just as an aside, one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing was dealing with a lot of the legal structure of our church. If you don't follow the church manual, you've just stepped outside of all the insurance coverage that the church offers, and you're on your own. And if anything goes bad, you lose your house. So it just pays to stay within the bounds of the church manual when you're operating along the way. One of the things that you need to do, and meetings need to do in particular, is champion the vision of your entity. So if it's a local church, what is the vision of your local church? If you haven't got one, you better get one, all right? Just make sure you have a very good vision of what your local church is trying to achieve. And everything on your agenda needs to go back to that vision. Otherwise, there's no place for it on the agenda. And some of the more mundane things, a maintenance issue, how does that fit the vision? Well, isn't say if your vision is, create a caring community, blah, 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 isn't part of that to ensure the facilities that you have are representative and create a warm and safe place for people to come, right? So make sure that stuff's relating back to the vision. If it's not there, what's the purpose of it being there? You've got to facilitate it. And especially finances. When you're discussing your church budget and all that sort of stuff, if your budgets aren't following your vision, then you've got the wrong budget. Resources should always follow the vision. Never should resources dictate the vision. Resources need to follow the vision. So when you're voting on your budget, when you're voting on expenditure items, how do these items support the vision of the church? Make sure in your meetings that that's always being discussed along the way. There's a lot of management type issues that you've got to follow in church boards and business meetings, compliance related issues. They're the means, the how things happen, as opposed to the governance, the big picture stuff, the results, the strategy. What you need to be thinking about with your meetings then is ensuring you've structured your agenda accordingly. Don't turn up to a meeting and go, oh, what are we talking about? What's on the agenda tonight? You're the chairperson. You make sure with the secretary of your meeting, you work out the agenda well beforehand. Work out what items you're going to discuss and when. It's really important that you do that. Create headings in your agenda. Typically, you might start with introductory items. That'll be the devotional. That'll be the prayer. Then might have a couple of compliance-related issues, and that'll be approving the minutes of the previous meeting. Then launch into the strategy issues. What's our direction? What's our evangelism programs? What's our big picture items? Then at the very end of the meeting, that's where you stick the things that, we need to approve this, we need to approve this, we need to approve this, all right? Do them at the end, because time expands to fill, item discussion expands to fill the time available. So if you leave your strategy to last, you've got 10 minutes, and that's not worthy of that time. Do your big picture stuff first, deal with the little stuff at the end. And make sure people understand during the course of the meeting, what's the intent of this agenda item? Is this agenda item for discussion? Is it just to record a note? Is it that we need a decision? What's the purpose of this item? And actually list it on the agenda as such, for discussion, for noting, for decision, or whatever, so that people have a clear understanding. Over time, you can train people in your meetings to know, hey, this is a compliance-related issue. We don't discuss this. We just record it, and we don't have to spend the time doing that. When I first moved into one of the conferences, our executive meetings used to go from 8 in the morning to, at the earliest, 6 at night, and often till 11 at night. And we just said, this has got to stop. And so we restructured the way we did things. We put a lot of time into sending material out before the meeting started, so people had a chance to read and understand. We put a cover sheet with every item so that people understood what the intention of the action was for. And our meetings used to run from 8:30 to 1:30. And that was it. And we covered more material, bigger vision, bigger strategy than we'd ever dealt with before. And it got effective, and it just became a model and an example for the rest of the meetings in the conference. So make sure you understand what you want to achieve, both in the meeting and with the items that you're specifically talking about along the way. Also, it pays for the board members to understand what their role is. What's their purpose there? What are they there for? In the material that you've got there, there's a couple of things, some suggestions as to what characteristics they need. We developed it, again, one of the conferences I worked in, we developed a job description for our committee members. And we had, the criteria we had was, firstly, they needed to be spiritual. Second, they needed to be of integrity. And that included things like confidentiality. You got one chance. If you blew confidentiality once, you were gone off the committee. And that was it. And that's really, really critical, because confidentiality builds trust within the committee structure. They needed to have some emotional intelligence. In other words, they needed to be self-aware, and they had to be able to manage themselves. So they didn't do the, and I've worked in conferences where we went to board meetings where people stood up, pushed over the tables, started throwing punches at each other. So some pretty lively board meetings. They didn't experience high levels of emotional intelligence. So you need to make sure that you've got people on there that can do that. We also suggested they needed to have just a little bit of commercial business acumen. Didn't mean they need to be brilliant in that area, but they needed to at least be able to look at some numbers and get a bit of an idea. And plenty of times people came onto our committees that didn't have that, but we trained them in that. It took an hour, and then they'd be able to read the financial information in the committee. The last two things we required of them was loyal engagement. That is, they had to stick up for what happened, because remember, in a meeting that the meetings are a collective decision. And so that means whatever the meeting decides, everybody's bound by it. So even though you might disagree, doesn't mean you're not bound by it. All right, you've agreed, you're in the meeting, that's what it is. So we required people to have loyal engagement, not to be white-handing the rest of the meeting or the rest of the people. And the last thing that we wanted people to have was to be collaborative, curious, and courageous. All right, collaborative, working together as a team. Curious, exploring ideas, not just taking the status quo, asking the hard questions. And courageous, being if they didn't get the answers that they were after, to keep asking till they got those answers and get it clarified along the way. Because a meeting where everybody agrees is a waste of time. It means that most people are redundant. You actually want to have some of that lively engagement. That's one of the things about a movie that attracts people. There's that sense of conflict and that sense of dynamism in a movie. And so if you can get that in a meeting, people are expressing views, people are exploring new ideas, and it just works out absolutely brilliantly along the way. Look, that's a summary of a few bits and pieces. Is there anything, Brendan, I've missed that you want me to touch on?
Yeah, so before we open it for questions, talking about the conflict part, Warwick, I remember a sentence you said to me when you coached me through this meeting stuff, that conflict was my friend. You said conflict is your friend in a meeting. Up until that point, I tried to run my meetings to keep conflict away from the meeting, because I just didn't like the idea of conflict in the meeting. I wanted everyone to go home nice and have all the fruits of the spirit and all those sort of things. Conflict being friend. And I remember one particular meeting where we did have some conflict start there, and it was between two really good people. And I remember you looking across at me and I thought, got to let this go. We explored the conflict, we went down there. But tell me about conflict being your friend. What do you do in a meeting with that to make it your friend?
The first thing is to manage it, be proactive in the process. Now, conflict can be a range of things. Conflict can be as simple as just having differing ideas being discussed, and that's all above board, and it's fantastic. When conflict degenerates into argumentative and violence, then it's probably gone too far. It's time to end the meeting and move on. But you certainly want people having different ideas. I mean, I love football, and one of the expressions we have in football in AFL, because that's real football, is that you play the ball and not the man. All right? It's about going for the topic, not being personal about things. When meetings degenerate into being personal attacks, it's over. It's time to end the meeting and move on. but you want to encourage people to have great ideas. I worked with a conference president who I really loved the process where, we'd talk about some concepts and ideas, and he would bring it into a departmental meeting to start with. And he was brave enough to allow the departmental people to thrash it around and to change it. He wasn't so precious to hang on to it, so that at the end of the meeting, it was actually a much better idea because he wasn't so precious that he just demanded that it be ratified. So you want to embrace conflict from the point of view of being able to say, hey, let's explore these different ideas. Let's play the ball and not the man.
What we did at Papatoetoe, and Warwick, your main part of this, was had the board trained in some of that, had our meetings trained. When I say trained, explained to them, this is how the meeting works, this is how conflict works. So that way there was that permission. Would you suggest training of some nature for most church boards when a new church board is formed or a new church starts?
Absolutely. Look, I believe that you should be inducting every new board member whenever they come on, that at the beginning of a new term, you should have just one whole session on just board development. And then every second board or so, you should have some little snippet, only 10 minutes of just board development, some new topic, how to do this, what do we think about that? One of the great things that I've seen in meetings that works brilliantly is at the end of the meeting, when it's done, for the chairperson to sit back and say, so what went well in this meeting? What didn't go so well? What will we do better next time to make our meetings run well?
Now, the other thing, I've just got some notes that I took from you, Warwick, so I dug out my old notes from when we used to do these board meetings. And you emphasised at the start of a board meeting, setting the right tone with the devotion. Don't unprepare with the devotion. So the importance that devotions at board meetings, what have you got to say about that? At that time, you emphasised heavily that devotion set the tone, put a lot of energy into doing a really good devotional time.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, that's the whole purpose of our operation is all about that. So you want to make sure that when you're going into a meeting, the devotion isn't thrown together at the last minute, or you've just dragged some guy and say, oh, by the way, could you? Because again, that just sets that really unprofessional, really poor design sort of process that everybody then follows because you're setting the tone. Ask somebody to prepare a worship, share it around amongst the board members each time, or do it yourself, but make sure it's targeted to what you're wanting to do, particularly achieving mission and vision. Make sure that every devotional is coming back to achieving vision and mission in some way and setting that tone. It's really hard. I mean, it happens, but it's harder for meetings to degenerate into really personal conflict when you've spent time in prayer together right at the very start, when you've sort of had that period of inviting the Holy Spirit in, of Jesus being an active part of this meeting.
Now, the other thing which I found quite intriguing, which I've tried a few times since, is you talked about how the space where the meeting is defines the feel of the meeting. And so at Papatoetoe, we then started shifting our board meetings from the usual room to, at one time we had it in the beginner Sabbath school room. At one time we had it in the main area of our worship area. Another time we had it in the youth Sabbath school room. Any comments on how the room defines the meeting?
Oh, very much so. Particularly those of you most of you have been in this situation. You join a new church, you have your first board meeting, and it's where they've held the board meeting for the last 45 years. Some of those people have been on that committee for that long, and they're sitting in exactly the same seats they've always sat in. And as a result, they're thinking all the same thoughts they've always thought. They're going to say the same speeches they've always said. It all comes rolling out. It just pays to mix the meetings up a tad along the way and just change that dynamic. Have people sitting in a circle rather than around a round table, rather than sitting with a table at the front and rows of people facing into it. Have them sitting in a rectangle sometime. Go and sit in the kindergarten Sabbath school in the little chairs and experience what those kids have. You may find that you actually need to put some resources into that space because you didn't realise it had been so long since you'd been in there as a group as to how bad it was. All of those sorts of things, that changes the dynamic totally. If you've got a lot of young people in your church and you meet in their space, then the people that are there from that group, they feel a little bit more comfortable being in a space they're a bit more welcomed into along the way. It just sets the tone for how you set the meeting up, where you meet and what you're doing.
Now, before we get in some of the other nitty-gritties of the meeting, one of the things that you have mentioned today, but for me was probably the most significant point when you coached me through this whole meeting idea, and I'm looking at Russ Wilcox on the screen at the moment because he was an intern at Papatoetoe. And I remember we used to have some meetings, and at one time Russ said to me, he goes, I just want to know what's going on with these meetings. What do you want? Do you want a decision? Do you want us just to know stuff? Do you want me to solve this? Or do you want me just to sit and listen to it? And I remember that bunch of questions. And then after you'd coached me in meetings, I guess the most significant point I learned from you, Warwick, is clarify what you want from each decision. And saying to people, hey, on this decision, we're not going to decide tonight, but we will decide next month. So I want you to hear the information and think about it. Or on this one, we're going to vote on this tonight, so be ready for that. Any further comments on that? You did mention it today, but as far as clarifying what we want.
Absolutely right. The people need to know up front, particularly if you're not wanting a decision. Some people, for them, the highlight of their life is going to a board meeting, and so they're pumped up to make decisions quite regularly, and they get very disappointed if they're not allowed to do that. So just set those expectations right up front. Be very clear that, look, this is a discussion point. This is just to let you know what's going on in the place, or we really do need that decision. And I really want to emphasise, it's a really good idea on a regular basis to say to the people, look, we don't want the decision this month, but we're going to vote on it next month, right? The idea for people to have some information given to them, processing it, and then to have a more lively discussion next time round. There's a lot of research going on in this space at the moment. You guys are probably aware of it, of the whole thing of introverts and extroverts. And one of the big issues in that space is introverts are significantly disadvantaged when you go to a meeting and dump all this information and say, make decisions. Introverts tend to process the information and take time to do that. They're the ones that on the way home or the next day are going, oh, would have been really good to have said this. We should have done that. We should have thought about this or those other issues. When you do that, then the introverts have the time to think about the stuff, process it, and at the next meeting, you get a much, much better decision-making process, much richer and better information.
That's one of the big things that you taught me in this whole process as well. Up until that point, I would read stuff, I'd write documents about stuff, I'd go to a board meeting and say, guys, this is what I think we need to do. And one of the tips you gave me was make sure that your board can come for the ride. They don't need to know all the stuff, but if there's stuff you think they need to know to make the decision, make sure they get it before the night of the board meeting. And so that's when we're giving away reading material. That's when anything that I thought that had led me to that point, we'd share that as well.
You did. You shared a lot of stuff.
Now, yeah, that was because of you. Now, just a quick comment, because we're going to get into some nitty-gritty about how the meeting actually works, but some quick comments on governance versus management. I've heard you talk lots about governance and the big picture versus management, which seems to control us. Now, at Papatoetoe, we end up setting up a separate governance board and separate management board, but most of our churches don't have that number of people, first of all, or that type of person, first of all. So governance and management and what that looks like, for instance, in a church at Tennant Creek.
All right, so just broadly the difference between the two. Management is stuff like, okay, we need to make this repair, we're going to vote some funds to do this, we need to allocate some time to do that kind of stuff, that ongoing day-to-day, getting operational type issues. Governance is the bigger picture, it's the how it's the why things happen, it's the strategy, the direction, it's the results that you're after rather than the means of how we're going to get there. How that happens in a big church, hey, it's very common to have two different groups doing that, a management committee that are just handling those day-to-day things, reporting to a much bigger governance-based committee. How does it happen in Tennant Creek, a little church with not very many people? Just on your agenda, draw a line, management, governance, or I'd go governance first, management second. Deal with your governance stuff. So we're talking governance-related issues right now. Deal with those big picture items. Say, okay, we're done with that. Let's take a 5-minute break. Now we're moving into the management-related issues. Deal with the management type of stuff. Okay, so you're basically going to put different hats on at different parts, remind them what they are at the different parts of the board. This is our governance, this is our management part. Okay, we're in the meeting. There's people on that board who you know need to
share some valid opinions. There's people who dominate boards, and we all know those kind of people. How do you run your board meeting in a way that is able to get the opinions you need? Or before you talk about extroverts and introverts or the various personality styles, some of our boards, there's the matriarch, the patriarch, who everyone looks to before the vote happens. Some of the nitty-gritties of having boards make wise decisions. What's some of that look like?
Yeah, like that's just huge, isn't it? When we all know those people, and you know, been in those meetings along the way. You know, I love. It's entertaining. That's probably the right word. To look at it, be in a meeting sometimes, and you know, the chairperson wanting the decision, and everybody just looks over at the matriarch or the patriarch, and they give the nod, and everybody goes, "Yeah, okay, we'll do that," sort of thing. Look, when you're chairing, when you're in charge of the meeting, if you do have the matriarch, patriarch type person who is a key decision maker, you need to be talking to them during between meetings. You need to be keeping them involved in the process along the way, so there are no surprises in the meetings. I worked in with one board where there was a guy who was a retired chartered accountant, and he loved picking the eyes out of the financial detail, and like he was, you know, how much are we paying for our pencils? You know, we can get them cheaper somewhere else. We learnt with him, give him all that information a week beforehand, ask him to have something for us the day before the meeting, and we'd deal with it that way. It just saved everybody time. Yeah, it was an extra hour of my time, but it saved 13 hours of time for everybody else. And so, yeah, you've just got to work through that kind of a process. You need to be sitting in the meeting and drawing people into the conversation. You know, Ray, we haven't heard from you for a while, or Mike, you know, what's your perspective on this? We think you've got something to add here. Draw them into it, or equally so, to be able to say, you know, Lyndon, we really appreciate the commentary that you've been giving us, but you know, right now we think let's share it around a bit. You know, all that kind of stuff. You need to start getting some skills in doing that, practicing those sorts of things.
On the chat side, which is going on down the side of your screen, Daniel's just mentioned that his Italian solution to these problems is cement shoes. Daniel, can I just remind you, you're working in a church environment?
I once worked with a conference president who said, Warwick, sometimes the only solution to a problem is a funeral.
Yeah, so you could pray for it, Daniel. So Gary McIntosh has written a book where he analysed church life at different sizes. And he says at different sized churches, the board takes on a different role. So in a small sized church, you still need to have your board because that's the release valve, that's the space where officially decisions are made. But he said unofficially, the churches run around the family table. He says that as churches increase, the board becomes more relevant, or at other times it takes on more of a governance role, less of a governance role. So churches of different sizes, how do you see the board working differently?
Oh, absolutely. So that little church model that we were talking about, it's everything. It's deciding the whole lot. But again, you've got to flip hats during the course of the meeting, so you know the intention of that item and what you specifically want to do. The mega church, the big church, look, you're going to have a myriad of committees. You're going to have an oversight committee that's dealing with that big strategy governance stuff. Then you're going to have your operational ones along the way. These guys don't want to get their hands dirty with that stuff. They just don't have time. They need to set big picture agenda, big picture direction, and have accountability for that, and learn to let go and trust. You know, one of the things that we joke about this, but I'm still staggered that when I was a sec treasurer, the number of church fights we'd have to adjudicate on over the colour of the carpet, the colour of the tiles, that sort of stuff. My wife and I, when we moved here, we built a house. And Kerry said to me, you know, like, okay, we're going to build this house, blah, 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 blah. You know, I want to do this, want to do that. And I just looked at it and I said, you know what? I'll be really happy just open the door on the day that it's finished and say, wow, you did a fantastic job. I don't really care what colour the walls are. It's my marriage is too important to me to worry about that sort of stuff. She tried to get me to choose a colour on the garage door. She gave me 4 options, and I said, well, which one were you thinking about? She said, that one looks nice. Well, what a surprise. That's exactly the same one I was thinking. Fantastic. Let's go. Just doesn't worry me. You know, you've got to learn to pick your battles as a church.
I can see Robert and Jasmine. They're watching on the same computer screen, and I think Jasmine's affirming you, Warwick. Now, as far as, we'll do question time in a moment, but as far as resources, at the time, this book's a little older now, but at the time, Warwick, you got me to read this book, Death by Meeting, Patrick Lencioni.
Yep.
What book are you recommending for meetings at the moment? What book would we, or what resource would we avail ourselves to? What are we going to do to grow ourselves more in that area? What would you be telling students to read? What would you be telling pastors to read or avail themselves to get better?
To be honest, that's still one of the best in my view. I still think that's one of the ones that really nails it. He's the guy that has that phrase, would you rather go to a movie or a meeting? That's where I got that from along the way. I think it's really, really good. Better Boards is a website that do some really great stuff. Christian Ministries Australia, CMA, they have some really great stuff as well. They've got a fantastic little booklet with 16 key points that church boards need to be thinking about, and they've got an assessment process that you can use for that as well. And they've got some really great resources as well.
Okay, guys, at this point, thank you, Warwick, for sharing all that. At this point, we've got a little bit more time together. So if you've got a question, the easiest way, I'll just put you all on gallery view on my screen. If you just raise your hand. Now, some of you I can't see because you're on telephone rather than available. If you're on telephone and not on the screen, I'll unmute you and give you a chance. But otherwise, if you just raise your hand, I'll unmute you if you've got a question that you would like to ask. Okay. Any questions anyone has for Warwick? Robert, go for it, mate.
I'm on. Okay, I'm on. What happens? I've gone through an experience where the board has become so dysfunctional, so right wing, that it seems to be out of control. Have you ever experienced that? What do you do?
Yeah, there's a few things with that. One is, you work through the basics. Second one is consult with your conference, what you can do. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's their church. And if that's what they're going to be, and that church is going to wither and die as a consequence, you do what you can. But if that's all that's going to happen, that's what's going to happen.
I just trying to work out. Somehow I've got someone unmuted who's got a phone call. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, Warwick, I have a question if I can ask David Riley here. I'm just interested to hear what subcommittees of a board that you've heard that you've seen work well within our Adventist context and framework. What are some of the subcommittees that you've seen could be established to help a board focus on vision and the big picture?
Yeah, good question. Again, it depends on the size of the church. So if we're talking mid to larger sized churches, a finance committee is not a bad option. Get them reviewing the finances on the monthly or quarterly basis and just reporting that to the board, going over the annuals, making a recommendation of a budget. That can work really well. Vision and mission, ministry committees, getting them focusing on how do we engage with the community, how do we make our vision and our mission reality amongst the people that we're functioning with. Really big churches might have a personnel committee that would be looking at making recommendations for the key roles for the nominating committee. And if you've got 5 or 6 paid positions, they might have some engagement in that process. A really good committee is to have one for a bunch of blokes to be looking at the maintenance and that sort of stuff and development of the properties. It gives people some engagement in the process. There's a lot of really handy people out there that are really skilled in those areas who find it difficult to engage in the church in other ways, and that gives them a really meaningful place to be involved and to have a solid contribution into the church. And then you've got your standard ones, your youth committees and all that sort of stuff that you need to be having, but yeah.
Makes sense, David?
Sure, thanks.
Yep. Just had a question on the side there, the name of the book again. It's Patrick Glenstowney, Death by Meeting, but on the handout, you will find it on page 8. It does make reference to it. So it's 2004 by Josie Bass, but you'll find that on the handout. Now, a few of you asked about the handout. Thank you, Daniel, for once again resharing that onto the chat. So that's on the chat at the side of your screen. You can grab the Word document out. A question from Russell. I'm just going to unmute you now, Russell.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, a few years back, I had I think we were doing a board meeting and got back home later that evening and had a phone call from one of the members on the board, and his first words were, "I'm going to take you to court." And that's always a nice thing to hear.
Yep.
So my reaction was okay, what's all this? I just had a chat with him. And then later I said, look, if you're worried about the way I'm handling the meeting, no drama. I'll just call in the conference secretary and that will work out. So that's what we did. So we set the meeting for the following week and redid the whole meeting. And it was interesting how the conference secretary just handled it exactly the same way that I had the previous week, but then there was no drama. So, but some people, like Robert was saying there, what do you do with some people? For me, don't make it a personal issue. It's not me against you. But let's just, we got to work things through as a church, and that's how I handled it anyway.
Yeah, it's a good way of handling it. Always try to depersonalise things. Well, that's me. Sorry, folks. Always try to depersonalise things along the way as much as possible. I use, and I've seen it work really well, using we, us, rather than me, I kind of statements along the way, engage everybody in the process. And there's a lot of people that you just need to work with them between meetings. You need to go and, there are some guys that I've worked with in the past that they'd either hang around after the meeting and they had to debrief after the meeting, or the next day they'd want to talk and just, get stuff sorted out. And that's something, it's just what you have to do.
David Riley, I'm just going to unmute you again for a moment. You've got your little hand still up on your screen. Is that because you've got another question, or is that up from previously?
No, another question, if I might, Brendan.
You may.
Warwick, you talked before about the importance of an agenda going out a few days prior and giving people some heads up, perhaps, and some time to think about what was to be discussed, which is good counsel. I've seen in the past and done it myself, where even on the agenda you might have an approximate time limit for each of those topics. I have, when I've tried to do that, had some resistance to that for various reasons. Do you have any comments on that as an extra feature of your agendas?
Yeah, look, I'll be really honest. I'm a fence sitter on that one. I've seen it, and I've spent many meetings where it happens, and it's a good indicator. But I've also been in meetings where people have been slaves to that, and really good discussion has been ended prematurely because of the running to the time frame. You definitely need the ability to be able to extend those sorts of times and say, no, we need to keep going here. I'm more of a stickler for a beginning and an ending time of the whole meeting, and saying, look, we start at 7, we finish at 9, and you get to 9 and you beg if you need to, you beg their permission to go to 9:30 at the most, and then that's the end. Along the way, just as an aside here, I am OCD about starting on time. If the meeting says 7, it starts at 7, and the reason is this: I made the effort to be there on time. If you're going to wait till 10 past, you've just wasted my time. You've devalued me over somebody else who's prepared to not be there on time. So you start on time, or I'm walking out the door.
Warwick, just a follow-up question: how do you feel about phones ringing during a meeting or a Zoom session?
Oh, look, I just terminate it. I just say, that's it, you're done.
We can mute David Riley, by the way. Other questions? If you just raise your hand, you can either put the hand up on the screen, or I'll click unmute now for Daniel. So Daniel Matteo, you'll go, mate.
Yeah, g'day. I just got a question about what seems to me sometimes unnecessary levels of committee within our church, particularly when we've got a smaller church or a church that has been big in the past and it's shrunk or whatever, and they're trying to stick to the church manual, and the business meeting and the board meeting is the same three people. I'm like, at what level can you sort of just, you talked about the manual before and insurance and all that sort of thing, but then we think about nominating committees and selection committees, and when you've got a smaller church, it just seems like unnecessary levels of administration that just waste people's time. Just wondered if you could comment on that for me for, in some brief way.
Yeah, look, in most instances, for a lot of the committees, your church board can function as that committee. It doesn't have to always appoint a separate group of people. In many cases, you can appoint the same people and just cover it off in that way, because that's the reality of what it is. It's going to be those people anyway in that process. Some of the other ones, look, the selection and nominating committee, that sort of thing, at local church level, that's what it is. It's in the church manual. It needs to go through. There's a due process. Again, in some cases in small churches, same group of people almost, but you need to do it. That doesn't mean though you have to set up a separate, youth advisory committee and a personal ministries committee and this committee and that committee. A lot of those can be all say, you know what, these roles and functions, the church board is going to function in that capacity. And in your agenda, just list it. Say, okay, now we're dealing with personal ministries related issues, church discipleship related issues, youth related issues, that sort of stuff.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. I'm just about to unmute Ben Ray. Thank you, Ben.
Hi. What about people wanting to add an agenda item on the night? So you get to the end, people look at the clock, there's 10 minutes left and they want to throw their thing in. Or for that matter, just how do you handle lay people contacting you saying, we want this on the agenda for the meeting? What's the best practice there?
Again, it depends on the meeting in some extent. So let's talk about a church board meeting on the way. If you've created the culture in your church where this is, if you've got board agenda items you want put on, this is the closing date for the agenda. We put them on the agenda. We send the material out. And it goes. So if you've created that culture amongst your church, then at the board meeting, I'm very, very reticent to add last minute items for that very reason. If though you haven't created that culture, well, you've almost empowered people to do that. You need to rethink that strategy and that process. I would be very tempted to say to them, look, tell us, what is this issue? Is it so time sensitive that it can't wait? Why is it coming in at this point in time? Why wasn't it with us earlier? And just trying to suss out the agenda behind all of that, because sometimes people hold off and stuff so they can, put a gun to your head in the meeting, and you don't want that, and you need to call people out on that. Otherwise, the process is, well, you know what, if this is so critical that can't wait till next month, we'll call a special meeting in a week's time. People get peer pressure starts to build in those circumstances. People get sick of coming out to meetings, and you'll find that when they raise it in the meeting, saying, "Oh," and people will go, "You should have brought this to us last week." Blah blah blah. We should have got it on the agenda. So you get the boards start self-regulating over time.
What's the process for filtering people wanting to have an agenda item when you might not think it should even be discussed?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's very, very open. You got to ask yourself why you don't want it discussed. Is there a really, really good reason? Sometimes there are really good reasons. Sometimes there are personal vendettas. Sometimes it's just inappropriate, and that's fine. You talk to the people and you let them know, and you explain those sorts of issues. If they're very, very unreasonable and just absolutely demand it goes in there, well, you know what? Sometimes you got to let it roll. Sometimes you bring it into the meeting and let it go and see what happens. But always, never at the last minute, always with some time beforehand. So you've got a chance to brief your board as to what's happening. These people are bringing this item. I've spent a lot of time talking to them about it. This is the background. This is where we're coming from. This is what we're intending to do out of this, and see where it goes from there. But you've got to be careful about filtering, because some people then say, hey, look, like there's no transparency here. You're hijacking the agenda, all that sort of stuff. Most of the conferences I worked in, we had the rule that if somebody wrote to the executive committee, we took their letter, irrespective of what it was about or what it said. Didn't mean the executive had to agree with the people or deal with it. They could look at it and say, this is rubbish, thanks very much, it's been tabled, move on.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask another quick question?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so sometimes we have difficulty getting a quorum at our board or business meeting because people just can't be bothered coming out. What's the best practice if that's a repeated problem?
Okay, two things. What is a quorum for a board, for a business meeting?
Well, our local church set their own number.
Absolutely. In the event of them not setting a number,
I don't know.
it's as many people as turn up to a duly called meeting.
Just any.
That's the church manual. All right, so provided it's been duly called, however many turn up is the quorum, unless your church has set a specific number. And if it is, well, then you've got to follow that number. If people have got a habit, and going back to the Pavateau days, Russ and Brendan, you know, what do we have then? 700-800 church members, and we'd get 10, 12 people to a business meeting. You know, I mean, we did jumping castles and sausage sizzles and everything to try and get
donkey rides.
Absolutely, donkey rides to try and get people to come to business meetings. So yeah, it's pretty hard yards. Like, to be honest, folks, you know, if you want to really get a big turnout, you've got to have an issue of adultery or theft. People are just coming out in droves to come to a board meeting and discuss those sorts of issues. If it's a board meeting and people aren't turning up, you've got to ask the big question, why? Why aren't they coming? Are they disengaged? Is it because they see the meetings as being pointless? Is the time inappropriate for everybody? You know, what's going on? I'll tell you now, you put a church board meeting for me on a Sunday night, I'm not there. Forget that. Not for me. Other people, that's the best time for them. Got to work all those sorts of issues out. Ask the big question, why? Why aren't they coming? And again, if they're not interested, why aren't they interested? What are you talking about in your meetings? Aren't the people interested in what's going on in your church?
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And now Daniel wants to talk to you separately, privately, about why you've got a Roman shield in your office, and he wants to discuss Roman armour with you, but you can discuss that in a private conversation at some point. He does have the whole thing there, Daniel. I'm going to go to Robert. Unmute Robert now.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that previous conversation about... Oh. Am I still... Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay. I was just going to discuss about what... in regards to what sort of agenda items you commit to meeting. I found that people who are there to railroad or have personal attacks on someone or something like that, what I've endeavoured to do is any of those kind of personal issues, I said, look, the head elder and I are more than happy to sit down with you and discuss any of these personal matters. But in regards to anything that's going to be beneficial to the health and the vision of the church, any agenda item is welcome to that. And that's sort of helped me to avoid conflict. If they've got issues with emotional intelligence, or they're always prone to want to attack or verbally, railroad the meeting, abuse, whatever. And if it sometimes comes up in the meeting, I just say, look, I think that's enough instead of that.
Yep.
Calm down about it, and let's see how that fits into the big picture of where we want to go as a church, not just my idea.
Yeah, that's good, Robert. I think you've hit some really good nails on the head there. We in those a considered view that I've got over a long period of time now is we've been pretty quick at times as churches to nail people for some really big obvious sins. You know, if they've had an affair, if they've been engaged in pornography, if that sort of stuff. We're really quick to nail them that, but we haven't been quick to nail them on character assassinations, on slandering people behind their backs, on being bullies in the church. And I believe it's time as churches we did start to stand up and call people out on that stuff and say, this doesn't fit with the gifts of the Spirit. This doesn't fit with the type of people that our churches are trying to be, and to start inculturating that more into our church.
Okay, guys, we've only got a couple more minutes left, so I'm just going to ask Russ a question before we wrap it up, and then I've got a couple more comments before we call it quits. So, as I say, in my meetings, what Warwick did with me back at Papatoetoe made a big difference. But more recent times, and a meeting we just did a week ago, Russ shared the idea of Trello and how that works as far as a space where you share documents, where you have boards there. Russ, can you do a very quick summary of why Trello is a good thing for meetings and what Trello is, why it's good for meetings? Then I'll come back to Warwick for a moment.
Yeah, sure, Brent. Hi, everyone. Trello is a little web-based app which is modelled on the idea of sticky notes. So if you imagine having a blank desktop in front of you and you were to set out your thoughts in vertical lists of sticky notes, and you might have a number of those lists side by side, that's basically how Trello looks when you put it up on your screen. If you were to look at the back of each of those cards in the list, you could imagine that you could attach photographs, Word documents, presentations, links to other websites, links to Google Documents, Dropbox, anything. So
we've just lost Russ, or can everyone still hear me? Or have we lost Russ? Have you lost? Yep. Sorry, Russ, we've lost you there, buddy. Yeah, so explaining what we'll do at some point, we'll do a whole thing on Trello and how to use Trello for meetings. It's quite a useful tool in itself.
Yeah, hi, Brent.
Sorry, we got Russ back?
Yep. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you now. I got you on a different little picture. Yep.
So if you want, I can quickly throw it up on the screen. Otherwise, basically that's the concept. Trello.com, and on the back of each card you can stick any number of attachments. So it's a great way to organise your thoughts. Trello then becomes a great tool for collaborating with others. If you're holding a meeting either in person where you have internet, or you're holding it on a webinar like this one, everyone can access the same content live, a bit like a Google document. So it saves with email, saves with printing, and it's just a great way to collaborate with all sorts of things, from projects at Big Camp to running your local church to anything. So.
Well, last week was the first time I used Trello for a meeting, and thanks to Russ for introducing me to that one. And it made a difference in the way we prepared for the meeting, made a difference in the way people could engage with the documents before, during, and after the meeting. But yeah, we'll put some more time into that down the track in one of our other webinars on using technology in our ministry. It's pretty much time to be done. We'll take one more question. If there's one more question, then we'll wrap it up. No, we're right. Warwick, thank you for joining us. Now,
Cool.
I know you're a busy man working on your research. I know you're a busy man with your lecturing and being a granddad as well. That keeps your time pretty much sorted out. But if we were to contact you, if we wanted further help with our board meetings, if we wanted to help with how we go about meetings, how we go about governance management, you'd be happy to see.
Yeah.
Reply?
Absolutely welcome. Look, the overarching value of Avondale Business School is to add value to the church. And one of the ways we can do that is by helping you guys. So by all means, give us a yell.
And we email you at?
Warwick.long, that's WARRICK.long, L-O-N-G, at avondale.edu.au.
So questions, Warwick's got a whole lot of resources on running more effective meetings. We only just touched a little bit of it today, but if that's an area you need work on, then Warwick put you in the right spots. Russ, I know that you share with ministers right across Australia. If anyone's interested in how Trello can make a difference to meetings, you're happy to share some time with them? Yep, all good. Well, thank you. And it's just been exciting seeing the names pop up as people have joined into our meeting today, and seeing different names from Tasmania, from Northern Australia, right across to Perth. Once again, thank you, Warwick, for joining us. Thank you, each one of us, for joining us. Let me say a prayer before we're done today. Lord, as we come to you today, we just thank you that you've given us this calling to ministry, and we just ask that we go about things in ways that honour you. We pray for our pastors whose faces are on the screen today. We pray for our pastors right across Australia. And as we think about the various meetings we're in, board meetings and elders meetings and worship team meetings and all kinds of environments, may we take to that meeting a person who's sold out on serving you. Maybe take that meeting a person with a humble spirit, a person who wants to lead with diligence. And we just pray that what we contribute to our churches is contributing your fruits of the Spirit. We just ask for your guidance and blessing. We pray for Warwick today. May you bless him as he leads at the business school at Avondale. May you bless him in his role as a husband, as a parent, as a grandparent, and also guide and bless his study. We just always I pray for each one of us that we allow you to work in and through us. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining. Enjoy your afternoon. And as far as coming up, our next date is April 6th. So Thursday, April 6th is our next webinar date. I'll make sure that you get the advertising for that once again. We're doing Preaching for Life Change. But April 6th, then I'll send your ministerial guide, the schedule with all the dates, who's presenting on what dates. They can get that out to you. And then you know which days to mark into your diaries to join our Ministerial Association webinars. So enjoy your afternoon and catch you later.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Warwick.
All right, see you guys.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Warwick. And
everyone's
Russ.
unmuted. If to say their goodbyes, you're all unmuted at the moment.
Thanks very much. Terrific.
Catch you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brendan. Thank you, Warwick. Thank you, Russ.
Very welcome. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Warwick.
Thanks, Dave. Good to hear from you, buddy.
Yeah, likewise.
Did you record this, Brendan?
Yes, it is recorded.
So I'm just wondering, so you'll send us a link or something that we can share with our crews?
You send your link to share with the crew, yes?
Fantastic. I really
You
appreciate
can
it.
record this on Zoom, man. You just hit record if you want to record something, and you can record it yourself and save the file.
Yep. No, that's also a handy tip to have. We'll get better at Zoom as we go as well, because it's just starting to work out how we do it all, but we'll get better at that game.
Yeah. Got lots of notes.
Excellent. Thanks, Russ.
Good to see you, Dave.
Yeah, and you, Daniel. Thanks for your prayers, mate.
Yeah, we love you, mate. We miss you.
Yeah, likewise.
Cheers, guys. All the best.
Thanks, Gary. Cheerio.
Blessing.
Bye, everyone.
See you later, Daniel. Have a good afternoon, mate.
Thanks, Brendan. That was very helpful.
You're very welcome. And I see you had noodles out of the pot.
Whoops.
Your wife didn't even give you a plate. I'll tell Karen next time I see her. I'll say your husband
wasn't home.
Your pot.
I was camping out.
I'm sure you were.
Blessings, mate. See ya.
See ya. All righty. Thanks, Wolfgang. Thanks, Russell. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good afternoon.